and we can get there. If not, we cover in theory 2, where we talk about like the best types of chord progressions, or chord progressions that are commonly used. But in tone music, goal-directed motion from one chord to the next chord. So not just putting like random chords together, but making sure that like, from one chord to the next chord it sounds good, and that there's what we call a harmonic goal. Like they're leading somewhere, or they're going away from somewhere. Usually your destination is your one chord. That's your musical home, you know, for whatever key you're in. And then everything kind of revolves around the one chord. We also call this part writing, ways which chords are produced, connected, alright, yes, part writing, voice leading, same thing. Another term that we are dealing with, but in not in such a strict way that this is class focused on the idea of counterpoint, but this idea of counterpoint, where you're combining relatively independent musical lines. So the goal of this is, if we're writing for 4 parts, soprano, alto, tenor, baritone, or bass, that the soprano part could be its own melody, the alto part could stand alone as its own melody and be an interesting melody. The tenor and the bass, all of them have basically their own interesting melody, but then when you combine them together, they create this wonderful piece as well. So that means, and we'll discuss what makes something independent and what makes something dependent and so on. But that's the kind of a few definitions, a few vocabulary terms for the type of music that we're going to be discussing. Now, when I was a freshman learning about this stuff, I was really into jazz, and still am, but the thought of like this music or writing in this style kind of like I didn't think it applied to me. So don't have my attitude. Don't have the attitude that, because it does apply. It applies to all music in one way or another. The stuff that we're going to be working on will apply eventually, maybe to your favorite type of music in some way. But to really understand what we're doing here, I posted. You see, there's a lot of things that you can't see, but it's already up on D2L Unit 3. So the type of music that we're talking about is Baroque era, more or less the style of what Bach would have written for Correct. So to really kind of understand what it is that you're going to be working on for the next few weeks, I thought it'd be good to listen to a few examples so that you understand now a little bit more about the style. And it might not be your favorite style, might not be your cup of tea, but that's going to be our foundation. And then if you kind of put it in those terms, all right, I'm going to start with this, but then eventually we'll add more to it. It's scaffolding. We start with maybe the foundation, and then we can keep adding things to it, and we get more elaborate as we go. And this stuff can, there's a lot of beauty in this style of writing, and a lot of nuance and a lot of creativity and complexity as well. So you can get a lot out of just with Bacharel, because they're pretty complex stuff. But let's listen to a few examples. the church, and that's where you would have heard this, yes, in the church. So Bob wrote a lot of music for the church, a lot of these are all hymns. The text is sacred, so yes, it would have been performed in the church. Now, well, all right, before I get there, any other characteristics? Go ahead.
Within the four-part harmonies, which I just feel like I've heard a lot in this style of music, like, seems like two of them, often at a time, will dip in the chord, like the end of the first full measure there. Two of the four will go at the five. Yeah. There'll be another like an eighth note. The movements, whereas other ones will stay.
Others will stay.
Yeah.
You notice that some are moving down, others are moving up. Okay. That's when we talk more about counterpoint, that's a big key to counterpoint is, like I said, creating independent lines. Well, one great way to create independence where they sound like they're not connected at all is to have them go in opposite directions. So you have the maybe soprano going down, bass going up, that creates a lot of independence between the two parts. Other things we're noticing? What about the motion? We call this conjunct or disjunct motion in music. So conjunct motion would be stepwise motion, and disjunct would be like leaps or skips and jumps and what type of motion do we see in these different parts?
Conjunct.
A little both, but mostly
Conjunct.
Mostly conjunct in which parts? The soprano part, you look at the soprano part,
Yeah,
it's all stepwise, right?
soprano and tenor.
Tenor as well, steps, even the alto, yes, alto, all stepwise. The bass though, jumps around a little bit more.
Hmm.
There's a reason for that when we get to it. But yeah,
You have one phrase to the next one.
bigger leap. Yeah, but even at the very beginning, a lot of
other parts.
oh, you know,
After the fermata.
after the fermata. Yeah, I mean, there's no hard and fast rule about that. Yeah, there's a leap there, but generally speaking, it's mostly conjunct motion that we're looking for. Stepwise motion, smooth voice leading, or like where it moves from note to note, chord to chord, smoothly. Why do you think Bach would have tried to write that way for these chorales? Who were supposed to be singing these chorales? Church choir, right? But then also you want to get the whole congregation singing. So you don't want it super complex because you want people to be able to sing along. So you want it to be sort of singable. I mean, obviously this is Bach, so it's like genius status, but at the same time, like you're not gonna have all these really huge jumps and things in there if you want everybody to sing along, and you want it to be, easily sung. Sing like the melody is hummable, where you're like you go away from the service and you're like still kind of remembering the tune in your head, so it's not so abstract and weird where it's jumping all over the place. Vocal singing, you want everybody to sing together. You want it to be mainly conjunct motion, as opposed to if you're writing for instrumental music, you more disjunct because it's easier to jump around, like say on the piano. I can, very easily just moving my arm around to get disjunct motion. But singing those notes is a lot harder to do. So, that was one of the things I had to get through my head when I was freshman in college. The theory was that I'm not writing for the saxophone, I'm not writing, hit bebop licks here. I'm writing music for vocalists in a church style. So that, like, again, try to keep that in mind, and I think you'll be happier too, like, just understanding why we're doing this, because that was the other thing, this doesn't sound like any pop music right now. Well, no, but there's gonna be some things that you're gonna learn about this. And it doesn't even sound like Beethoven in a way, but Beethoven would have studied this. Mozart would have studied this. So the foundation is here for almost all styles of music, at least Western influenced music after. So that's a little now example of this, like listening example of what we're looking at. Go back to the book. So first thing on the bottom, page 66, top page 67, these are pages that I would definitely highly recommend that you reference. Put a bookmark right there on those pages. You're going to come back to it quite a bit. So the authors of this book, this would not have been the way like Bach would have written or like learned, because no one had done before Bach. Basically everybody after Bach saw what Bach did and other Baroque composers did and said, all right, so to write in the Baroque style, most of the composers did these things. And so now these things become the rule if you want to learn to write in the Baroque style. It's not to say that every Baroque composer, like, there might be exceptions to some of these rules along the way, but in general, if you follow these guidelines, your end product should sound somewhat similar to what we just heard. Okay? So, rhythm. This was an easy one. Keep it simple. So, most of the types of examples we're going to see are going to be a 4/4 time, maybe 3/4 time. So, a lot of the good complex learning that we did earlier in the semester in chapter 2 about time signature is all really relevant to like anything that you're going to play outside of this music. In this style of music, it's going to be mostly just 4/4, 3/4. So that's kind of nice. And where it says keep it simple with most durations being equal to or longer than the duration of the beat. So another thing that I didn't point out, but like most of the time, the music that we just heard, everything was quarter notes, right? It was equal to the beat. There was a few eighth notes. Right now, we're not even going to deal with eighth notes for the most part. I'll give you a few reasons or examples of when you use them, but for the most part, right now, if it's quarter note is equal to the beat, then most of the rhythm should be quarter notes. Or maybe at the end of a phrase, you have a whole note or a half note to start off, or there might be a few half notes in there, but everything's gonna be mostly equal to the beat. The final final note should occur on a strong beat. For a 4/4 time, what are strong beats? 1 or 3. So this is something I often forget to remind students of, so I'm going to try to do it as often as I can. But if you have, say, we have a 2-bar phrase, and your melody is we're in 4/4 time, and your melody ends here, that is not a strong beat. Often students will want to try to fill up that final measure all the way to beat 4, but that's not a strong beat. So you have to make sure that you end your melody on beat 3. now you have a strong B, and that complies with our rhythm. Or you end your entire melody on the first beat and you have a whole note. Or you could have a half note with a half rest. But make sure that that final chord, again, so expect you all to remember all of this right away, but this is a gradual process. I'll keep reminding. Harmony. This one's pretty straightforward too. At this point in time, doesn't mean that this is like a forever rule, but every note in the melody should belong to the chord that is to harmonize it. Okay? That's not to mean, again, later we could have non-chord tones, but right now every melody note needs to be a chord tone. And type of chords that we're dealing with, good news, bad news, I don't know, but for I think most of us, it's good news is that we're only dealing with triads here with these, as far as writing chords. And we'll still look at music that has seventh chords in them, but when we're writing our practice examples of chorales, we will only be using triads. So if that's the case, you only have 3 notes to choose from for your melody, for every chord, for every beat. Because you either have the root of the chord, the third of the chord, or the fifth of the chord. And that's it. Alright, again, for right now. That's going to be the rule. Every melody note should belong to the chord that is to harmonize. Contour. We talked a little bit about contour already. Conjunct motion, stepwise. So the melody should be primarily stepwise motion. The shape of the melody should be interesting, kind of vague, but clear and simple with a single focal point. That's the big key right there. Focal point, meaning one high point in that melody. Alright? So if this is our melody here, even within this first measure, I have one focal point. One, like this D, that's where it comes left, is higher than any of the other notes. If I go to the next measure, I go up to E. Now, my new focal point is E. So within the, like a phrase, whether it's most of our phrases are going to be 2-bar phrases or 4-bar phrases. We're going to be dealing with shorter examples here. Now if I go to the next measure, and I go back up to an E, now I have 2 focal points in my 4-bar phrase. Can't be there, I don't want to have that, so maybe in the last measure I go up to an F, and now I have one single focal point in my melody. So one single high note out of the phrase. And again, contour, you notice it's contour that I wrote, and I don't know, I did not think about how it's going to sound, just about how it's going to look. But it goes up and down, you know. A few leaps are going to be okay, but mostly stepwise motion. And we'll talk, there's some explanation of leaps and skips when we get there, but that's what an interesting contour is going to be. It kind of goes up and down. If we look at some of the examples, letter A, we say this is a good contour. Everything about this little melody is good. Kind of similar to what I have, although I don't have the chord notes or chord symbols below them. You're going to be given the chords, you're going to be given the harmonic progressions at this point. Again, a little bit later, hopefully this semester, we will talk about how to build your own chord progressions. But right now, chord progressions are going to be given to you. So, in the key of C, our one chord is C, G. Melody note is E, is the third. Our 5 chord, G, B, D. D is the fifth. Back to 1, C, E, and G. The little hyphen there just means the one chord is carried through. You do that, you'll see that, kind of abbreviation sort of thing. 4 chord FAC, you have an F in the melody, 5 chord GBD, and back to 1 chord C, E. Alright. They're saying this is kind of is an uninteresting contour. It goes stepwise up and then stepwise down. I mean, there is sort of a wave shape to it, but I mean, it's kind of expected and not very interesting. All the chord tones still do fit with the melody. And then C, or yeah, letter C, we have problem that there's 2 focal points. I mean, the melody is a little bit more interesting because it goes to the skip up and then move it down and then skip up and move it down. That's kind of interesting, but the 2 focal points, we would have to change a different, maybe one of the 2 notes of the focal points, or we change a different note in the melody so that we have a higher note than the 2 focal points to create a different focal point. Which I like one way could be like maybe move that C up to a G. And now we would have 1 focal point with the G being the highest note in the note. They also point out, this is something that you gotta watch out for, is like on this 5 chord, our 5 chord is G, B, D, the melody note is E. That's not one of the chord tones, so we wouldn't be able to use it, so that would be an error right there. Questions so far? Kind of absorbing it all. There's a lot to take in. All right, here's where it gets really in depth. And again, have these pages marked, because you don't want to come back to this a lot to remember until you kind of see enough examples and you start to like memorize it a little bit better. It's gonna take maybe a week or 2 and going through a lot of examples before it really starts to become second nature for you. Leaps. There's 3 bullet points here about leaps and a lot of information packed into each one of these sentences. So we'll go through slow and let me know if you have any questions. So the first thing, when we have leaps, we're going to avoid augmented intervals. Why do you think we would avoid augmented intervals in this style of music? Augmented intervals are usually considered dissonant. They're also harder to sing, right? So again, we got to think about our audience and who we're writing for. Augmented intervals, just in general. And what I mean by augmented interval, not an augmented, like we think of, right now we're thinking about augmented intervals about stacking them up. But what I'm talking about is an augmented interval. I could be in the key of C, and if I have a leap from F to B, what type of fourth is that? It's an augmented fourth. So this is diatonic, meaning both F's and B's are in the key of C, no sharp, no flat. But going from F to B would be is an augmented interval, and it's an interval we would want to avoid. So it will mostly between 4th and 7th, scale degree 4 and 7. That's going to be an augmented interval, and that's something that we want to avoid. We also want to avoid intervals of 7s, whether they're major 7s or minor 7s. So we don't want these big leaps in there again because it's hard to sing. 7s are hard to sing. So if I have a melody, again, could be F, it doesn't matter, but if I wanna jump up to E, that would be a kind of a tricky melody to sing. So we're just gonna say any sevenths we're gonna avoid. And intervals larger than an octave. Octaves aren't that bad to sing because it's whatever note you're on here, you gotta sing it just an octave higher, it's gonna sound the same but just higher. You know, so not octaves aren't too bad. But anything higher than an octave might be kind of a stretch for some people. And again, difficulty goes up with intervals larger than an octave. Again, if you're writing for instrumental music, you write for a piano, doesn't matter. But we're writing for vocalists here. So, and again, untrained vocalists or congregation. Diminished intervals, there's a little bit caveat about diminished intervals. Diminished intervals are dissonant, and you don't want to have a ton of them, but there are some diminished intervals that seem to resolve in a way that most people expect them to resolve. And so, as long as you resolve them in the proper way, they're okay to use. So the proper way, diminished intervals may be used if the melody changes direction by step immediately after the interval. So if we go back to our augmented fourth, what's the inversion of an augmented fourth? Diminished fifth. So rather than going up an augmented fourth, what you could do with your melody is go down. F down to B. Now this is a diminished fifth. It's okay as long as you resolve by step in the opposite direction. So in this case, the leap is going down. We're going to go a step up. And if you're in the key of C, it's like it wants to resolve here, right? So even though this it's a diminished fifth, it's a dissonant interval, but it sounds like it makes sense, especially if you're the dissonance gets kind of hidden when you add the rest of the chords to it, or the fact that it goes where you expect it to go. And that's kind of what you want with this style of music. You don't want a lot of twists and turns here. Yeah, because we're writing for our congregation, we want everybody to listen to sing along. You don't want to trick them. So again, diminished intervals are okay as long as you move by step in the opposite direction immediately after that diminished interval. All right, that was just letter A. So like I said, we packed a lot into those two sentences. Letter B. A melodic interval larger than a perfect fourth is usually best approached and left in the direction opposite to the lead. What the heck does that mean, right? Okay. So we're going to say intervals larger than a fourth, even though they kind of mess up the wording here later in the book. But we're going to say if it's a perfect fourth or smaller, that's going to be considered a skip. And then we're going to say anything larger than a perfect fourth is going to be considered a leap. Alright? If it's a leap, meaning it's larger than a perfect fourth, then it has to be special attention has to be made around it. Because if everything's stepwise, and then you have this leap, that's one of those creative moments that you can kind of think about if you're trying to be creative within this style of music. A leap is something expressive. And so if you have that kind of matching up with, like, say, certain lyrics, maybe this is, you're talking about up to heaven. So then you got this big jump going up. So now the melody matches the lyric. We call this word painting. And that was something a lot of Baroque composers did. was they would, the melodies and the music would match the words. So if the lyrics were talking about like getting sad or something, then it might go into a minor key, you know, or there's a lot of things that composers would do. So we have a big, like say a leap of a fifth. So say we're going from C to G in our melody. Melodic interval, large upper chord, best approach and left in the opposite direction of the leap. Meaning, this is a leap up. I need to approach it by going down, and I need to leave it by going down. So the note before the C, depending on whatever the chord is, needs to be, it could be a D going down to the C. It could be an E going down into the C. It doesn't have to be stepwise. It just has to be going in the opposite direction of the leap up. Which means that after I leap up, the next note has to be below the G. So again, it could be a step, could be F. Doesn't necessarily have to be a step though. It could be an E. As you know, it could be another leap down. We just don't want a whole lot of leaps, but you know, it could be a leap down. And majority of the music should be conjunct, not this structure. But it's good to have a leap or two. It's a 4-bar phrase. It's good to have at least 1 or 2 leaps that are in there to give it a little of an interesting contour or something to, again, that's it's sort of like, to me, like like in this style, it's about as vanilla as you can get. But you know, we're gonna add maybe just a little bit of, you know, cinnamon. Like we're not gonna make it super crazy. We're not adding like, you know, chili powder to it, but we're just a little bit of flavoring. That's gonna be the extent of how flavorful we get this. All right, letter C. When smaller leaps are used consecutively in the same direction. So smaller leaps means skips. Alright, again, the wording gets a little bit, I like to change the wording just a little bit, but we're dealing with skips. If I'm going from G, and I skip up to D, and then I skip up to D, they need to outline a chord. G, B, D, that's a chord. If I skip A to D to F, here's a skip of a 4th and a skip of a 3rd. This does outline a chord. It outlines a D minor triad, maybe in second inversion if you want to do it that way, but it still outlines a triad. D, F, A, no matter how you stack them, it's going to be a triad. So, what you can't do, basically, is you can't have 2 fourths in a row. 2 skips of, like, 2 fourths in a row does not outline a triad. A 4th and a 3rd, a 3rd and a 4th. It could be major triad, it could be a minor triad, it could be a diminished triad. Doesn't matter, as long as that outlines a triad. And we don't want like more than 2 skips in a row because then we're outlining a 7th because we're not trying. So when smaller leaps, skips, are used consecutively in the same direction, we should outline a triad. So yeah, you wouldn't be able to do this either. F to C to E. Because F to C is a 5th plus a 3rd, even though it looks like, well, C is in the F major triad, okay, but E is not, and if you put them all together, you wouldn't have a triad. So it's got to outline, basically, another way to think about it, like, is a 3rd and a 4th works, or a 4th and a 3rd works, or 2/3 work, but any other combination probably won't work. Plus, this defeats our, rule B. We have our leap on the fifth, then our next note should be going down anyway, so this one will work. Questions at all about, again, don't expect you to have this memorized even by tomorrow, or by Wednesday, but eventually, maybe next week, most of it really, again, pretty kind of straightforward, almost common sense. Just this section right here, number 4, leaps, is pretty detailed, and there's a lot of information there. So that one gets a little bit trickier to keep going back to it, guys. The last rule or guideline about writing melodies in this style, tendency tones. Again, also pretty straightforward. We even, I think I've already talked about it. Scale degree 7, our leading tone has a strong desire to move up to 1. Right? So, 7, you can even stop and say like it's unstable, it wants to move to stability, it wants to move up to 1. So, whenever there is a 7 in your melody, it needs to go to 1. So if I'm in the key of C and I'm writing my melody and it doesn't matter where I'm at in the melody, if it's bar 1, bar 2, 3, or 4, if I get to a B, the next note has to be a C. 7, scale degree 7 wants to go up to scale degree 1. Right? The only exception of that is if every time you got to a B and if every time it had to go up to C, then that would also get predictable. So the only way around it is if you walk down the scale. Doesn't feel like it has to go back up to C. It feels like it could go down descending down the line. So if I got a C and I go to a B and I want to keep going down the melody, as long as I did that all the way down to 5, then I can go anywhere off of 5. Like if I want to do a leap up to say E, that would be okay. That's a 6, not a 7. It's not, so I'm going down, and then the next note would have to go in which direction? Yeah, not necessarily a step, but it just has to go down. The only time it has to go a step is if it's a diminished interval. Alright, but yes, because the leap is a leap up of a 6, then going into it has to go down, going out of it also has to go down. The other tendency tone that isn't as crucial of a note that like makes it into a rule, but it is a tendency tone worth noting, is that scale degree 4 often wants to resolve down to scale degree 3. Fa wants to resolve to Mi. And we hear that happen all the time. Say it. Fa, and it wants to or it could be a misplay. So Fa wants to go down to Mi, 4 wants to go down to 3, but not with the regularity of 7 wanting to go to 1, so it's not a rule that has to be like something that you have to follow every single time. Something worth being aware of, especially when we get into some of our 7th chords, say in second semester theory, you will find that if you can remember that about page 67. Please, again, mark those pages in your book, read them over. I would even encourage you to go to the Dr. E lecture between now and Wednesday just to review and listen to somebody else besides me talk about it. It just gives you a different perspective on it, maybe what's going on that would really resonate for you. But read through this material again. I feel like for most students, most semesters when I'm teaching this, like the rule about one, pretty straightforward. Rhythm, just make sure everything is on the beat. It's very simple rhythm. Harmony, really straightforward. Make sure every chord tone, like every melody note is a chord tone. Contour, pretty straightforward except for the focal point thing. That's one that most people have to remember, but making sure that you're doing one high note. And we do enough examples, start to sink in. The tendency tone one, 7 goes to 1. I've already kind of talked about it, shouldn't be totally brand new to you. It's the leaps, number 4, that most of us probably need to spend some time like reviewing and reading and committing something. So let's take the book likes to do a lot of examples and non-examples, like this is the right way, this is the wrong way. So if we look at A, we say this is a good melody. Every chord tone matches up in the melody to the chord that's to harmonize it. We have a leap here, a leap down, big leap of a fifth. It's approach in the opposite direction, and it's left in the opposite direction by another big leap. It's a leap of a 6. That's approach in the opposite direction and left in the opposite direction. Now, wouldn't normally have big leaps like that back to back, but the rest of it is all conjunct motion, all stepwise. So we have 2 big leaps here, but everything else is stepwise. So that makes sense to me. We have 1 focal point, that's C, that's the highest note in our melody. Everything else, all the other notes are below that C. Scale degree 7 is our G sharp. You're looking at the G sharp, you're like, that's not in the key, it's no. But we're in A minor, so scale degree 7 gets raised. Generally in minor, right now we're going to use harmonic minor scale for writing. So we raise scale degree 7, which creates a leading tone, which gives us back to 1. Here, we go down to scale degree 7 again, and that leads us back to 1. Alright, we'll look at the bad one. The bad example. Well, actually, let me play the first example. So you can hear it. And I'll play it once without the chords and then once with the chords. Without the chords. Here's our example though, let's say right off the bat, we can't do this. It violates 4C. What's the rule in 4C?
We're supposed to be doing multiple perfect chord jumps at the same time.
Yeah, consecutive skips, small leaps, skips in the same direction, need to outline a triad. And A, E, B is not a triad. Alright? Looking at next one, they're saying it violates A and B, for A and B. So what's happening here? There you go. C to G sharp is an augmented fifth. You don't want augmented fifth. What about 4B? What's the problem? Yeah, the leap is a leap up, right? We prepare that leap should be going in the opposite direction. This is going up into that leap. And when we leave that leap, we should be going in the opposite direction, and this is going up. So that breaks that rule. What about number 5? This one right here.
Because it's the G sharp is a leading tone, you're not even going to 1 or 6 after it.
Right. Which is why I think they bracketed the whole measure rather than maybe just G sharp. G sharp leading tone, so it should go up to 1, it should have gone back up to A. Or it could go down by step to the E, but they never got there, they skipped the F altogether. So, which I guess is worth pointing out right now, makes using the harmonic minor scale a little bit tricky. Because if we think of our A harmonic minor, A, B, C, D, E, F, G sharp, and A, what's the interval from scale degree 6 to scale degree 7? The whole step, half step, full step, full step, full half step here. What's this interval? Augmented second, right? So if you're writing in minor, and minor always sounds familiar to major, but if you're writing in minor, you can't just write up the scale, or you can't think of going, like if it's the ending, you're like, alright, I'm on an E, then we'll walk up to A to end this. You're not going to be able to do that using the harmonic minor scale. Right now, that's your only option. Later, we'll learn other ways to get around this, and that would be maybe using melodic minor scale instead. But right now, as it stands, for the writing exercises, we're only going to use the harmonic minor, just to, like, from a starting point. But it creates some problems. So you won't be able to actually, like in minor, you won't be able to write down, going down to the fifth by steps, because you will always end up with an augmented second when you do that. So it kind of creates a little bit of a problem that way. Again, if that is your hang up, just know that we'll resolve that eventually. Alright, so now listening to this melody. It'd be really tricky to sing if you were to sing along. That would be a little bit more difficult to sing, right? And there is some awkwardness think again, if this were an instrumental piece, you can break some of these, you know, it's a different genre, different style, these different variables that go into it. All right. So, the book even admits, melodic style we have outlined in previous pages is admittedly a very strict one, but it's a good place to start. Melodies such as these can be found in hymn tunes, for instance, as in the next two examples. So we have this can be used, the first line is sort of like a reduction or the kind of the basis of the melody. And then you have ornamentation or elaboration of that melody. But you can see, you take away some of the frill, it boils down to the same rules that we were just working on. Oh, I didn't have to play it, I could have just done that.
Example, 5, 5.
Not better than that, but, alright, so, let's take a look at a few examples of melodies that have errors in them. So these all have errors in them, they don't tell you how many errors, which makes it a little bit tricky, but let's see how many we can find. So look at the first one, number 1, the key of G. First thing I do, kind of think about the order of from the previous pages. So like one rhythm. Typically, most of these examples, just in general, aren't going to have an issue with the rhythm, but it's worth looking at. All right, so I got mostly quarter notes and 1/2 note at the end. Everything looks good. Do all the chord melody notes? Are they chord tones? That takes a little bit more time. All right, 1 chord in the key of G, G, B, D. Melody note is G. That's good. 5 chord, G, F sharp, A. F sharp. 1 chord, G, B, D. There's my D. 4 chord. What notes are my 4 chord in the key of G? C, G, and that's an A. So that's a non-chord tone, right? So I'm going to circle that. But because this is the first error that I found, I'm going to write A next to it, or 1. One or the other. I don't know what this will look like. Trying to avoid having that. Okay. So what I would probably do for say a homework assignment, circle that, write A A or 1 next to it, then off to the side, in the margins, I'm gonna explain why I circled and put an A next to it. In this case, and just simplest way, most succinct way that you can, like for me, I'm gonna write NCP, which stands for non-quartile. Yeah, is it?
So we're gonna have to run like this on like tests and quizzes and learning that.
Yeah.
So as a general rule, when writing melody in this like chorale style, you're
Yeah.
not aiming for extended harmony. You're just
Exactly.
okay.
Yeah. Right now. Right. I mean, down the road, we'll talk about non-quartiles and how to use non-quartiles. But right now, every note of the melody should be a quartile. Root, third, or fifth, and that's it.
So, the second note, the F sharp,
Yes.
is the 7th degree of E.
Yes.
But it's not then leading to an A, nor is it descending in the scale. So, does that not make it?
That doesn't make the cut either. Oh, wait, well, no, it is a quartile. But but we haven't gotten to the rule about tendency codes yet.
That's what I was saying.
Yep. Well, you're just jumping that. Oh, yes. Haven't gotten there yet. You are right though. Alright, but let's keep going because we might find more, non-quartiles, maybe. So here's chord build off the scale of degree 5, D, F sharp, A, that's a D. Our 1 chord, G, D, D, that's a G. 4 chord, C, D, G, that's a E. 5 chord, D, F sharp, A. Number 1 chord, G, D, D. Alright, so the rest of the chords all look good. Melody notes look good. Number 3 talks about contour. Alright, do we have an interesting shape? Yeah. I mean, an uninteresting shape is going to be pretty much if it goes straight down, or if it goes straight up, or if it goes stepwise up and stepwise down, like the book gives an example. So, yeah, this is pretty varied. What was the rule about focal point though? 1 focal point. Which note is the focal point? What's that? There's 2 of them though, that's the problem. So we have another error. And what I usually do is I circle them both. I might do something like this. And say 2 focal points. I don't have to say, according to the book, there should only be 1 focal point. I don't have to give it that long, but I should just something, enough reason that why you circled it and explain it to me as succinctly as possible, so that you're not using up your entire margins trying to explain how to. Alright, again, rule number 4, there was a lot going on. The first bit of that rule said no augmented intervals. Well, I have to go through and I look for augmented intervals. I don't see any augmented intervals there. G to F sharp is a half step. It's a minor second. F sharp to D is the perfect chord. D to A, major second, and so on. Okay? No sevenths. I don't see any sevenths. Don't see any big leaps, so that's good. No intervals larger than an octave as well. Diminished intervals. I don't see any diminished intervals here either, so I don't have to worry about that. 4 talks about consecutive skips. So I'm looking for consecutive skips in the same, meaning in the same direction. So here's a skip, all in the same direction. Does it outline a triad? A to D to G. No, that's not a triad. Those are all perfect fours. So there's a problem there. And you can even, again, simply does not outline something along those lines. It doesn't have to be exactly those words, but just explain to me why you circle it and what it's wrong. Now, I've had students like circle this little bit too and say, well, this doesn't outline a triad. Yep, consecutive going to the same. But why is that not an issue? Why is that not a problem? Stepwise. Yeah. So all we're talking about are skips in the same direction. Not consecutive steps, but consecutive skips. Alright, and then number 5 talked about leading tone. So where was the leading tone problem?
We're on first method going from G to F sharp to that.
Yes. So when I'm looking for Hennessy tone issues, all of them really look, I mean, like if I wanted to just boil it down to the minimal, all I'm going to look for is scale degree 7. Like in the key of G, F sharp is scale degree 7, F sharp is scale degree 7. This F sharp resolves up to G, that's great. This F sharp does not resolve to G, and it doesn't continue down the scale, so there is the problem as well. So say that, I'll put D next to it, and say, I'm just gonna put 7 for 1. And again, you would say leading tone does not resolve correctly. If you want, you could just that way. So this is good. And this is C. I can't remember. I think they pretty much write the same thing, write it the same way, but there we go. So this is how it's booked in. I mean, different order, but they wrote resolve 7 to 1. So the non-chord tone, like I just wrote NCT, they wrote not in the 4 chord. That's a great way to put it as well. 2 leads should outline a triad. 2 focal points. Something along with it. There needs to only be 1 focal point, something that explains what the problems are. All right. Actually, let's try this one out. Section B here. Compose simple melodies that will conform to the given progression. Slashes represent bar lines, and every chord except the last one takes 1 beat. So, looking at number 1, how many chords do we see in the first measure before the slash? 3. So what do you think the time signature is going to be? 3, 4. So yeah, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Last note should be what type of rhythm? Got a half note. Fills out the entire measure. Right. Let's take a look at number 3 though, because we have 4 chords per measure, and then the the key of F major? One flat, E flat, right? And then 4/4 time. The first chord, one chord, 5 chord, 6 chord, 4 chord. First things first, what notes belong to my one chord in F major? First things first. F is, so, somewhere, I like to write them right underneath my chords, but somewhere you need to, I would recommend writing them out unless you really know these well and you know. 5 chords in the key of F major. C, D, E. 6 chord? C, F, A. 4 chord.
B flat.
B flat, E, F. 1 chord, back to 4 chord, back to B flat, E, F. 2 chord.
G, A, G, D, E.
E, E flat, D, and 5 chord, back to C, D, and 1 is F, A, C. Alright, so now I have my options. First chord, first note. We got, we can pick an F, we can pick an A, we can pick a C. Really, what do you think? F here or F here? Or, alright. That gives us some room to go up. We started high, that would give us some room to go down. We could start with, our focal point could be the first note. You know, like if you started on high F, but then everything went down from there, that would work. But, alright, so we got our F. Next. We have C, E, or G for our next. Okay. So let's step up. Blake. Our next chord, E, F, A.
Let's go D.
D. Okay. Do you want to go D up or D down?
Let's go down.
Okay.
Down.
What would be the problem if we did go up?
Leap.
Yeah, we have a leap now, and it would have to be approached in the opposite direction. So we would have, if we really like that leap, we'd have to change our first note, maybe to A, and then A would go down to G, and we could leap up to G, and it would be fine. If we don't really care about the leap up, we're like, doesn't matter to me. And this is where, if we were really doing this in a meaningful way, we want to play it or at least sing it and know what it sounds like, not in like a clear, okay, this is working for my assignment, but this is worse, and as long as I get through it. I understand. Sometimes you gotta do it that way too. But if you wanted to like really like follow through and like understand like why this sounds a certain way, you would want to play it or at least be able to sing it to yourself. But yes, leaping down will work. Alright, from there, Andrew, going to our next chord, B flat, D or F.
Let's go in the octave, D again.
Octave up, okay. So we have big jump here, but the jump up is going, being approached correctly, opposite direction. So now, Joey, going to our next chord, what F, A, or C, what note do you want there? Step down? Yeah, that works. Now we kind of like tempered that big leap by having this going in opposite direction. Alright, Leo, next note B flat, D or F?
And that's for the fourth.
Fourth one,
B
yeah.
flat.
B flat, we're gonna go by step. Okay. Isaiah, our two chord, G, E flat, or D? D. Here or here? Sorry. Oh, G4 or G5?
D4.
There wouldn't be any problem with going up to G5, but we just had a big leak here. And we don't, I mean, we just gotta be careful. Again, majority of it needs to be conjunct stepwise motion. So as long as we have majority, more than 50% of it is conjunct, then we should be okay. Cody, going to our 5 chord, C, E, or D?
I wanna actually read the cat G from here.
Now here, we could also do that. Right? Because it would be the same as doing this, except for we're not re-articulating the G. Or if you wanted to do a top, that would be the same thing. Yeah, when you have the same notes, you can always put a half note there instead, as opposed to notes the same. Now, having static motion where the notes don't change really isn't that interesting, but we have mostly movement here going on. I don't appreciate anything wrong with that. And when it happens on a strong beat, it's well, you typically, book doesn't talk about it, but we don't want to put it on a weak beat that has a hangover into a strong beat. That is not, because it almost creates like a syncopated type of feel, and syncopation is not, definitely not something that was used in this style. Rhythm. Yeah. All right, and then since I'm left, I'm gonna have us go back to the and there's a half note with a half rest. So, after creating my melody, I would probably still want to go through it step by step, like we did the melody, then when we're looking for errors, so then I can look, double check my answers. So, we got, the rhythm looks good, we know the harmony works with the melody notes fit the harmony because we just did it. Focal point, we were good at keeping one focal point. The contour looks good. We did have the bigger leaps here, but we addressed them, at least this leap properly. This was not a big leap, so we didn't need to address it, but it's possibly as well. Leading tone, we don't have one. I don't see any other issues with this. This looks good. So then the next thing to do is play. Left hand, the melody itself.
still have the rules, but I mean, it makes sense to resolve with the tonic. I mean, that's something you wanna think about, like you started and ended on the tonic.
It's stronger to end on the tonic, but it's not necessary. Like if we could have ended on the A, maybe, I feel like that would be a little bit more colorful note, but not as like strong of an ending. So that only difference. But the last chord does not have to be, the melody note does not have to be the tonic note. Should be the tonic chord, but again, we don't have to worry about chord progression right now. We'll do this. Yeah.
Is there a preference at all for the focal point to be on the strong beat? Fine, but it doesn't matter.
Yeah, it doesn't matter.
Which ones are the strong beats again?
In 4/4 time, strong beats are gonna be 1 and 3. Alright, we got a couple minutes. Why don't we, take a look at the homework. Homework for, we got a second here, homework for. Yeah, I think it's gonna be all of the next, that page there, whatever page that is. I think it's gonna be all of the next page. Page 35. So, it's these three, so criticize each melody in terms of rules, so like what we did earlier, and then it's only number 1, proposing a simple melody that will conform to this progression. And so that'll be your homework, page 33, all 35, page 35, all. But since we have a couple minutes, we can get a head start on it. Why don't we take a look at number 1? And take a couple minutes on your own right now and see if you can find any errors in number 1.
chord into that leaf,
Yes.
which is
Right. Exactly. We have a leap here from D to P flat. That's a leap of a 6, but it's not approached correctly. So I would probably circle all 3, A, and then off to the side of it, say leap, not approach. Correct. Along with that. Yeah.
There's a leading tone error in the first measure going from F to E, then down to C.
Yeah, alright, so the E on B3 in measure 1, the leading tone, it does not resolve. So you write unresolved, or I just simply write 7 to 1. One more. Yeah. Yes. B flat is the highest note in this melody, and it comes back to B flat. Oh, it took me a second. I do this one every time. I see it right away. So, like, you could say 2 focal points or no focal point. I guess 2 focal points is probably the better answer on that, but, there isn't one single focal point. So, I did not see any other errors. I don't think there are any more. Alright, so take a look at 2 and 3 by Wednesday. Should have, it is possible, I don't wanna say how many are in each, but between 2 to 4. And then, yeah, writing a melody, using this chord progression in B flat, so it's in 3/4 time. Each chord gets a B. Now, a beat, a measure 3 here. Hard to see without me enlarging it, I can't do it. We have 2 chord. Beat 2 is also a 2 chord. You can keep the same note if you want, or you can move from one chord tone to the other chord tone. And then beat 3 is a 5 chord. Beat 1 of the next measure should be what type of rhythm? Only one chord. Either half note, because it's 3/4 time, it needs to be 3 beats. Alright, questions?
Was Bach or other Baroque composers primarily composing with a tonic minor, or was it natural minor or similar to them?
They at least start, they would have been thinking about it. I wouldn't think those terms probably were around. So they were probably thinking of it, cause that was around the time that things started to solidify as like what is a major scale or what major key means. So he would have been using like basically all 3 forms of the minor scale in his writing. So he would have grade 6 and lower 6, grade 7 and lower 7. So yeah, I don't think he was thinking in terms of using like one
So he
specific.
was operating through the diatonic range.
Right.
Whereas
What would we perceive as that?
within our chorales, we will be shooting purely diatonic.
Yeah. Yeah, cause the way like he would have learned this stuff, would have been like the true counterpoint style, and that is way more complicated than what we use. So way more rules. This is like kinda like the watered down version of what he did.
That said, we will be focusing on counterpoint to a degree with our.
I mean, yes, to a degree. Not exactly the same extent. Other questions, thoughts? Alright. Have a good rest of your day, and we'll see you on Wednesday. probably,
a wet mess.
Probably got
like, because some of the assignments
Yeah,
were
just send me
half
what,
a page
another
and